If you're working as a health, fitness, or a wellness professional and you're helping clients improve low stomach acid issues by maybe using apple cider vinegar or betaine HCL, there are some factors that are important to understand about using carbohydrates when first starting to utilize betaine HCL. Let's jump in.
TC Hale is not a doctor and does not claim to be a doctor or licensed in any type of medical field. Don't be an idiot and use anything heard on the show as medical advice. This information should be used for educational purposes only, and you should contact your doctor for any medical advice. Now get off me.
So I get a lot of questions from health professionals about, hey, my clients are only using HCL with their protein meals, but they really need to acidify their stomach more to correct acid reflux or bloating situations and such like that. So I wanted to make this video to clear up some confusion that may come from some of the things that I talk about in my books. And it was chapter 3 and 4 of my book, Health Pro Results, where I go over helping clients figure out how to figure out which aspects of digestion are not working correctly and steps you can take to help them fix those issues. And using betaine HCL is a really big part of that. And, some clients may be able to use apple cider vinegar to help acidify their stomach, but that's usually only going to work if they just need a little bit of a boost. Apple cider vinegar is not going to acidify the stomach anywhere near as well as betaine HCL capsules will. And if somebody's having significant reflux issues and they have a lot of inflammation in their esophagus, drinking apple cider vinegar could really burn on the way down. So the only option may be to use some type of capsule of apple cider vinegar, which is usually not as effective as the liquid. But when somebody really has an issue where they need help acidifying the stomach, most of those clients are going to need to use betaine HCL. But in that book, I talk about how when you're first starting to help a client use betaine HCL, that you want them to test that out in a meal that does not contain carbohydrates. And if you're new to this channel and you don't know how to use these steps to figure out which aspects of digestion are going wrong with your clients and how to fix those, then that book, Health Pro Results, is available on Amazon, but I'll put a link in the description below where you can get that whole thing totally for free. And then you can just jump to chapters 3 and 4, and that'll walk you through all those processes. And if you're a consumer that just happened upon this video because you like the topic, then we'll also put a link in the description below for my book, Kick Your Fat in the Nuts. And chapters 3 and 4 of that book go over similar topics. That book is just more for consumers, where the Health Pro Results book is really written for health professionals. So I'll make sure that both of those are in the description below those videos so you can check out those free resources to help you walk through some of these things that I'm not really going to cover in this video. But, I've gotten these questions about, my clients are only using the HCL with their protein meals. And, we talk about how most meals for a client should really contain protein. Protein is what helps keep that blood sugar on a more even keel. It's kind of like the slow burning log on the fire. So if somebody's eating meals that are just carbohydrates, that really increases the odds of creating some type of spike and crash in blood sugar, which can create a wide variety of health issues and symptoms for your clients. So we like to see clients have a substantial amount of protein at every meal. So in my book, I talk about when you're going to start checking out this HCL with a client, most clients are just going to start off with one HCL capsule in the middle of that meal. And the reason they do that is because we don't know how much stomach acid the person is already making. The client may just need a little bit of a boost, and one capsule is going to be enough to fix these low stomach acid issues. And for a lot of people, it's reflux, and we know that reflux is not caused by too much stomach acid like advertisers want us to believe. It's more about a lack of stomach acid and not enough to trigger that lower esophageal sphincter at the bottom of the esophagus to close correctly. That's triggered by stomach acid. So if a client just has a small amount of acid in the stomach, it's not enough to trigger that valve to close, and then the small amount is going to come back up and burn them. So when we start with a client, we just start with one capsule because we don't know if they're already making some. So when they just put a little bit of acid in there, this is an opportunity that is common to magnify symptoms. Like, remember, this reflux is really caused by just having a small amount of acid in there. So a client may not have had any acid, and when we put one capsule in there, Now that small amount of acid may not be enough yet to trigger that LES valve to close, and then that small amount is going to come up and burn them. And they may have not even had reflux symptoms before. And then when they take one capsule, like, man, this gives me reflux. That's not right for me. But the reality is they just needed to increase that dose enough to trigger that valve to close. So here's where it's important with the carbohydrates. In a lot of cases, when a client doesn't have enough stomach acid, they're going to have a bacterial overgrowth either in the stomach or the small intestine, because that stomach acid is kind of it's like the barrier. That's what keeps all the bad guys from coming in and setting up camp. They should die in an acid bath when they come in on the food that your clients are eating. The problem is if there's a bacterial overgrowth there in the stomach, a lot of times they can really be activated by carbohydrates. So if a client puts carbohydrates in with that meal, that can really activate those bacteria, and then they create more gases. And an increase in gases creates more pressure, and that pressure is going to push a lot more stuff back up. So now they have carbohydrates in there with this bacterial overgrowth. Now you're putting acid in there to increase the stomach acid, but it's not yet enough for everything to work correctly. So now you're really going to push that acid up and then really magnify those reflux symptoms. So that's why when we're first starting with HCL, we like to see a client test that out with a meal with just like protein and maybe like green vegetables or something. Some carbohydrates and green vegetables is okay. You just want to avoid meals with high carbohydrate foods, things like, breads and pastas and rice and, all those things that are really going to magnify the carbs, activate that bacterial overgrowth, and push things back up. But if there is an overgrowth, the client usually needs to take other steps than just using HCL, but you really want them to be able to acidify that stomach at each meal, which is why they should be using protein at each meal, because the amount of protein that a client is consuming can kind of dictate how much HCL they need to digest that meal. So if they're having a meal with just carbs, they might not be using HCL with that meal. And then you're not acidifying the stomach. When you can acidify the stomach, it makes it a less hospitable environment for all these bad guys that are setting up camp there. So most clients will need to work up to a full dose of HCL. A lot of people kind of feel like that's about 5 HCL per capsule, and I'm not telling you to use 5 HCL with your clients, but we hear from a lot of clients that seems to be about enough to help them really acidify the stomach enough to help them break down their food correctly and trigger that LES valve to close and all those good things. So a lot of clients will have to work up to that to really be able to acidify that stomach. And some clients might need to take steps to take that overgrowth down a few notches if there's an overgrowth there, because if some bacterial overgrowth is putting out some type of alkaline waste product or byproducts that they put out, that can really neutralize the acids that you're helping the client put in there. So they might need to bring that down a few notches so there's not so much of an overgrowth there, and then the HCL they're putting in can really help them acidify that food correctly. So once a client gets up to a full dose that's working for them, really helping them to acidify their stomach correctly, the LES valve is closing and fixing reflux symptoms, then they can test out putting some carbohydrates back into those meals and see how they do. So it should be fine to consume carbohydrates with HCL. You just want to avoid the carbohydrates, especially that first meal where they test it out. That's really where there's going to be a lot of problem for most clients. If there's going to be an issue, is going to be when they first put a little bit of acid in there. Once they start to increase that acid, it's usually going to be enough to trigger that valve to close. So we just want to avoid the carbs when they're first testing it out. Once things are going okay, they can test out putting some carbs. If that's fine, then they can have some carbohydrates while they're using HCL. So it's really not about avoiding all carbs while using HCL and only using HCL when they're having a meal with protein. It's really about understanding that when we acidify the stomach correctly, then everything is okay. And most of the foods that they go in, they're going to be able to digest correctly without creating some type of major symptom magnification. So I hope that clears up some confusions. And if you do have clients that are dealing with reflux that you're having a hard time correcting, then it can be important to understand some of the pros and cons from carbohydrates. A lot of clients need to reduce carbs to fix a reflux issue, but some clients might need to increase them a little bit. So you can jump over right now and check out our video for pros and cons for carbohydrates for reflux clients.